So everyone, our next speaker is Harish Babu, a full stack developer at Jukebox and a self-proclaimed nerd with a passion for programming, video games, and history. His he has found a way to blend all these interests, and today he's here to talk about the fascinating intersection of technology and nostalgia. He will be taking us through the evolution of retro game emulation from the early days of reverse engineering to today's open source tools that help preserve and restore these classic games. He'll share the journey of how old games are brought back to life and the challenges faced along the way, including the murky legalities involved. His favorite Pokemon starter is something that I relate with as well. He's also a Charmander guy, so I'm really excited about this talk.
Hey guys, my name's Harish. I've been a gamer since I was 7 years old, okay? And I'm here to give you all a small glimpse into the world of video game emulation. So let's start with a few games, where this should begin. Now, to anybody who doesn't recognize this, right? This is Super Mario Bros. It was released in '85 for the Nintendo Entertainment System. This is Final Fantasy VII, released for the Sony PlayStation 1, one of the greatest RPGs of all time. Alright, now the common thing between these games is that they were originally released for consoles. In fact, they were never meant to be ever released on PCs, but we do play them these days, right? Okay, and the reason you're able to do that is because of something we call emulation. Now, this is the formal definition of what emulation is, okay? But if I want to put it simply, say every time you used a virtual box to install an OS on your Linux or your Windows to make it work, right? You are essentially emulating. How? Because the virtual box software is essentially acting like a motherboard with its own RAM, processor, and storage, so that I can install another software on top of an existing one, which should not be possible. That's what emulation helps you to do. And with the video game emulation, right, what you're essentially doing is that using software, you're replicating console hardware in order to play the games that you can't on PC. Now, the thing is, my first encounter with video game emulation, right, started here. Alright. Damn, it's nice that a lot of you recognize this. I was in high school and I wanted to play Pokemon, but I could not afford the Game Boy Advance. I was wondering, how do I do it, man? Do I save for 2-3 years before I can get my hands on a second-hand one? And then my friend is like, Harish, why go that far, man? You can play it on your PC right now. I was like, wait, what? How? So he's like, I'll show you after class. So school's over. We go to his place. He shows me how to download an emulator, download a game, load it in. And 2 minutes into the game, I reach this point where I have to choose my starter Pokemon for Pokemon Crystal. The next time I thought about how I was even doing this emulation, I was 120 hours in and I had 100% completed the game. That's when I stopped to think, wait, how am I doing this? This game was never released for the PC, but I'm playing it. Okay, so how is this possible? So then I learned that what I was using was the Visual Boy Advance emulator. Using that, I could play any game that was released for either the Game Boy Advance or the Game Boy Color. Now, first thought was, what the hell is an emulator and why is it letting me do it? So I was like, okay, I had to figure this out. And you know what? I started to take a deep dive into what emulators were and how this all started. Now, if you're starting a deep dive like this, right, you always have to need a starting point for all of this. You have to start somewhere, right? And with video game emulators, the place where you start is this, the Chip 8 emulator. Alright, this is the hello world of video game emulation, guys. This is where you start. Now, the first time I built this, I got to play Space Invaders and Pong. Alright. Now, playing it was cool, but my purpose was, how was I doing this in the first place? Is then I realized that I was essentially writing software code to replicate a Chip 8, which was essentially an 8-bit microcomputer from the 1970s. I was writing software to build an 8-bit microcomputer using pure software on my system in order to play those games. And this emulator is replicating an 8-bit microcomputer, which is let's say 1,000 times less powerful than any system you have right now, including your mobile phones. It is. Alright, but it got me thinking. Okay, I managed to do this because I had access to a free code camp lecture that explained the whole thing, step by step. How did the first guys do it? I mean, they had nothing to go on, right? They didn't have any data sheets, spec sheets, and so on. All the consoles were proprietary, and no company was just going to give it out. So that raised a quick question. So I wanted to take a look into that. Okay, now video game emulation, right? Started in the 80s, but emulation as a concept has existed since the 60s. Alright, because in the first place, when emulation was originated as a concept, right, the idea was to replicate hardware systems on software. And these were for research purposes, military purposes, all of those things. That slowly evolved to the civilian side of things for commercial applications like sound analysis, image recognitions, and so on. Now, video games, it picked up around the late 70s. But a proper video game emulator did not emerge until 1985. Reason being that no desktop system was powerful enough to replicate console hardware until then. And even then, they were subpar. The original emulators had problems. They had frame rate drops, they couldn't render things correctly, and so on. But by the end of the 80s, say around 89 to 91, that's when the first proper emulator came out for the Famicom. People got to play Ninja Gaiden, they got to play Superman, they got to play Sonic, and so on. Alright, so the guys who built these things, the hackers, right, they did a very cool thing. Now, they did not have the help of Google the way I did it. They had to figure out how the hardware worked, how the software was used, how to copy the games from the physical cartridges onto their systems in a file format that could be supported. They did all of this work. So essentially, they had to build the emulators, build the tools to build the emulator, and establish file formats for the game files, specifications, and tools to make the game files also, to copy them from the physical cartridge to your system. They did all of this work because they just wanted to see if it was possible, and I mean it, possible for me to play those console games on my PC. And at the end of it all, they went onto the internet, they uploaded everything, the source codes, the build tools, the asset creators, the mod kits, the script engines, everything online. And they were like, look guys, I built something cool, we had fun with it. So if you like to have your own fun, right, take it, use it, and if you can, right, contribute however you can, or build your own. Which is the essence of open source. And these guys did it purely for fun. These original hackers, the reverse engineers. Alright, now they started this purely for hobby and sharing purposes only, even when they put it out, right? They weren't expecting anything big. They were figuring that, okay, other gamers is going to download them, they're going to make something out of it, maybe emulate a few games. They figured that would be the end of the line. But the gaming community, the other gamers, right, who discovered this, they decided to take up the challenge / invitation and decided that, okay, these guys emulated these things onto computers. But if this is possible, what else can I emulate these games on? Is it limited to only desktop PCs, or can I do it on any other hardware? And they succeeded quite magnificently because, right, that's where the origin of this meme comes from. Can it run Doom? It's nice to know you all recognize this because, as you all know, right, Doom is run on everything these days. You can run it digital calculators, you're running it on your fridges, microwaves, the display panels on your Macs. In fact, I recently saw a nice YouTube video where a person managed to take the 2D Doom game, turn it into a 3D techno display. I'll share the link if you guys want it, but it's actually pretty cool to watch. Now all of these guys, right, here's some of the names for it. These people, none of them, not one, they monetized any of their work. It was one of the coolest things ever. They put a lot of effort in and they open sourced all of it because they wanted everybody else to have the fun that they had. Alright, now here's the thing, okay, once anything becomes popular enough, it eventually attracts public attention, which is the same thing that happened with the emulators as well. The companies, the game publishers and developers who took notice of this movement, right, At that point, they realized that, wait, PC is a market, right? Yeah, there's millions of dollars have been lying on the floor. Time to pick it up. So what did they do? Was the 90s, right? Say the second half of it. They started releasing all their console games to the PCs. All right. Metal Gear is a good example. Doom is a good example for it. These Mario games, Mario Kart, all of them. All right. But the thing is, the consequence of that was the hackers, right? They were like, wait, the companies are releasing all the new games to the PCs. So why bother trying to keep emulating the new ones? Instead, let's go back to the older games. We emulated some of them, but not all, right? Let's go back, let's find all of them. Let's put them up as well. At this point, they ran into a small problem. All right, because when they started looking for the older games, it turned out that many of these older ones, the files were no longer around. The companies didn't have the source code for it, or the physical cartridges from which they could copy the files, right? Were ruined, missing, corrupted, any number of things. It hit them then that all of these games, right, that they were enjoying since their childhoods, they could vanish one day. So the community decided that right then and there that, you know what, I am not letting this get buried in some graveyard somewhere. It's going to be around for as long as I keep it so that others can enjoy it as well. At that point, they transitioned from being hackers to what I'd call digital archaeologists. And they succeeded brilliantly. All right. They found every single game they could, including the abandonware and shareware demos. Games that were nothing more than a single file on a single CD shared in some magazine. They found them, they put it online out to a library and said, here's the file guys, download it for free, please have some fun. And if you can, share it with anybody else who wants it as well. They succeeded beyond all, in fact, beyond anybody's expectations. Even to this day, you can still find games that originated in the 60s. In fact, recently, thanks to one of these libraries, right, I found the first, in fact, you could probably call it the first RPG ever, built in 2D, and it was made in 1973. They did it. And I got to play it and I saw that many of the new mechanics that are used in RPGs, right, originated in 1973. It was brilliant to see. But right, one of the problems here, something that gets ignored in the whole thing, is that when this effort was started, right, nobody had any permission from the companies. Okay, they didn't have permission from the console makers, they didn't have permission from the game publishers or the developers. But they did it anyway. They put it up online and so on. Now, obviously, the companies are going to look at this and be like, wait, those are my games, those are my consoles, and these guys are undercutting, my sales. So, I have to take action, right? Now, the action they took ran a full spectrum, as you can see on the screen. All right. So, if you are starting from the bad news side of things, right? You have Nintendo. All right. These guys have been active, like since the early emulation days. They've been very active at shutting down any single project they could, whether it was emulating their consoles, preserving their games, copying it. It didn't matter for any reasons. If they could find it and they could shut it down, they would. To them, it didn't matter if it was only for fun or what. It undercuts their profits. They want it. Now, on the other end of the spectrum, I'd say relatively good speaking is Bethesda. What these guys realized is that gamers are guys who are willing to go the extra mile to enjoy their games, thanks to the emulation thing and so on. So they were like, okay, I don't want to release my source code completely. They didn't want to do that, but I still have to take advantage of it. So what they did instead is, they took their games and they built it in a way that was easy for gamers to edit it. They still make the course open source, guys. Please understand that distinction. They only made their games easy enough for players to edit and add content to it. All right. In fact, they did it so well. All of their games, the most successful ones, work because they are very, very moddable. In fact, it's the reason why Elder Scrolls V Skyrim was re-released 4 times. Okay, Elder Scrolls Special Edition, Elder Scrolls Anniversary Edition, Elder Scrolls Creation Club Kit. And they made profits every single time. And there is still an active community adding content to it every other month. In fact, if you want to take a look into it, right, check out Beyond Skyrim on YouTube. They are a modding community specifically for Skyrim who have been adding new maps, regions, content, missions, games, what you name it, for the past 10 years, and it's still ongoing. Now, there's a small middle ground here, okay? Blizzard. Alright, now I'm hoping a lot of you know about Warcraft and so on. Some of you might have played their games. Now, here's the thing. Blizzard didn't choose to go the Nintendo route or didn't go the Bethesda route, but they decided that, okay, let's take a middle ground. Gamers are willing to go the extra mile to play the game, so I'm not going to make it too easy, but let me give out map creators so that within my game, they're able to build their own maps and so on, maybe script up a few sequences and cutscenes they might like, and play games. It was still limited, but they allowed players to make their own fun. Now, this was revolutionary when it first came out, and it blew up. There were LAN parties, there were competitions, there were all of these things. Now, in the midst of all this, okay, now this was one of the really cool parts about open source, alright. One of the World of Warcraft players, a small teenager, he built a map mode on Warcraft. It got really popular, and people really liked the way he made the map and the mode and the rules and everything he set in place. So he decided that, okay, everybody's having fun with it. He took the map, he released it online, saying that, guys, here's the file, do whatever you like with it. Now, people across the community members picked it up, they made their own changes to it and so on. But two of them picked it up, they decided to do something with it. They liked the map mode so much that they took it, they built a game of it, which eventually evolved into one of the biggest multiplayer esport events ever. How many of you guys recognize this? That's a good number. Dota 2 is one of the largest multiplayer games in the world and one of the biggest esports events in the world as well. And this started as a free map mode in World of Warcraft by a teenager who was having fun and wanted to share it with others. That was, let's just say that I was laughing for a good 10 minutes when I learned about it. So you guys have seen the legal problems that emulators and so on face, okay, so far. You've seen the way companies have embraced it, denied it, they've found middle grounds. Now, the 3 examples I've shown are not the full spectrum, okay, there are still all kinds of responses, but I believe they encompassed the spectrum broadly speaking. But the more I delved into it, right, the more I realized that none of these hackers, right, who build the emulators, they never truly monetized anything they did. Yet the companies keep going after them. So my personal opinion is that it was not that nice of them, because your player is building a community and keeping your game alive for 10, 20 years. And yet you want to keep shutting things down. Why? In fact, the guy in the photo, right, he's Frank Cifaldi. He's the founder of the Video Game History Foundation. And he was also the leader of Eclipse. They were a company that specialized in video game restoration. You name a game from the 80s, 90s, 70s, whatever. They specialize in finding the cartridges, the consoles, restoring the game and the console, and getting you a software copy so you can play for it. Alright, and he had this brilliant quote I loved. Alright, let me just read it out to you guys. The hackers preserving games for future gamers, right? We didn't call them archivists. We didn't even call them digital archaeologists, like how I name my talk. We call them software pirates. In fact, they're still called that to this day. And yet, these are the same people who have not once, sold the games for any amount of money, keep adding content to it, and keep the game alive far beyond what the companies ever will. Alright, so my only hope is that, once you guys, go home today, right, download one of these emulators, maybe pick up one of your old games. It could be Mario, it could be Ninja Gaiden, it could be Rayman, it could be Medieval, it could be Legend of Zelda, whatever it is. Download an emulator, download your favorite game, plug it in, play it for however long you like to, and as you do, right, just think about it for once. You are able to do that today because a couple of people 30 years ago wanted to find a way to have fun and share it to the rest of the world. Now, if this is not open source, guys, please tell me what is. Alright. Thank you all.
If anyone has any questions, let us know. There's a question here.
Yeah, so I finished Chip 8, so it was too easy. Like I finished it in a day, but then I went to try to emulate Game Boy. That there's a lot of documentation to read. So is there some middle ground between Chip 8 and Game Boy, which is easy to emulate?
That one, you're actually looking at the NES emulator, SNESX.
Okay.
All right. So it's basically the next ground after chip 8. You emulate this one. Let me just move the slide up. Okay. You'll be emulating this next. Okay. So your first game after that, you're going to be playing as Mario Bros. All right. This is the middle ground because GBA is actually complex. People don't really realize how complex it is until they get into the source code, but it is. So this is the middle ground. Although you could also try emulating the Atari 2600, the Sega Genesis, or the Sega Saturn as well. They are also middle grounds. It's just the SNES is more popular. So you go from chip 8, then you go on to the SNES, then you go on to GBA, and from there, if you're still, you're still not tired out by trying to look through all the documentation, you can move on to Citra. It is an active emulator for the Nintendo 3DS. From there, you move on to Dolphin, and from there, well, I haven't touched the PlayStation emulators yet, so I can't really tell you much more.
Thank you.
So I wanted to ask that what do you think about the recent cases from Nintendo seizing down Yuzu and etc.
That one, I think they, personally speaking, okay, in my personal opinion, they jumped the gun on it, okay? Because Yuzu, the emulator for it, they very specifically made sure that their emulator would only work with games that you physically bought. Because you couldn't just download the file, load it into the Yuzu emulator and play it. You had to buy the game from the store because it will also generate the perfect keys for you. You had to copy those keys into the emulator. That would verify to ensure that it is a valid copy and then let you play the game. But Nintendo is known for jumping the gun, guys. So
what do you think about, like, will GB and DS emulators also be gone?
if they were going to be gone, right, Nintendo would have shut them down 20 years ago. But since they're still around, right, let's hope they're still around, man.
So some paid emulators are not free, DS and GB emulators, due to this scene. So guys, if you have some DS emulator, now it's free. So download Drastic. Drastic's free now.
Sure. Although if you're looking for a DS emulator, right, there's actually no cache GBA.
Yeah,
That's a good one.
Desium as well.
Hello. Your thoughts on the recent Stop Killing Games movement from the EU? Or what are your thoughts on that? And also, what do you think about Nintendo? Any certain...
I know exactly what you're looking for, Balu, but fine,
certain
I'll give it to you.
Linus moments you'd like to recreate here?
Fine, I'll give it to you. All right, I'll give you exactly the response you're looking for. Now, for those of you who don't know, okay, there is currently an initiative being run by a YouTuber called Stop Killing Games. It's going on in the EU right now. The essential idea is that once this policy is put in place, right, it ensures that if a developer is going to say for any reason stop his game, whether it's a multiplayer or single player game or so on, right, they're going to stop publishing it, stop making it available for purchase and so on. The idea is that they at least release the copy of the binaries, even if not the source code, at least the binaries, so that the gaming community can keep the game alive. Now, it's a very complex thing, okay, especially because you're trying to involve the government. And as Shri Sir put it, right, in his talk, when the government gets involved in the market, their responses get to be very, very bizarre. So, it's in the initiative phase, it's only in talks. It's going to take some time. Personally, I believe it's a good thing because there are a lot of games that are multiplayer only that have died off over the years. Because there were no players playing anymore, the company shut them down. All right. But for some of them on which the binaries were released, right, people have kept them alive for a very long time. Good examples I could think of right off the top of my head, right, would be Warhammer, Dawn of War. That's one. Or RuneScape has their own servers. There's another one set I can't really remember right now.
Harish,
Okay. Yeah.
but here's the thing though, is when you say that, right, certain games are not built to be done that way. So take something like, say, Fortnite, for example, right? When this law is passed, who does Fortnite? Epic, right? Yeah.
Yes.
Epic is now contractually obligated to ensure that they continue to support, though theoretically Fortnite will never die, but let's assume that it does, right? So they're contractually obligated to maintain this game for a limited set of users, for a limited set of people. Now, while I agree with the heart, the intent behind the thing, execution is where is where the stop killing games is failing. Their wording around their proposal is too vague, and as a guy who builds games in his free time, expecting developers to support this game even like post, like, see, companies are not going to kill successful games, right? So, and let's face it, the whole game that led to the Stop Killing Games Foundation also was a game that has been steadily dying, and it has a very limited thing. While I do agree games have to be supported, and like, you can't just kill games off, because there are certain old games that small games that I used to play that are not there out anymore. But expecting the developers to support it post the thing is a little kind of it's too high of an ask, right? So Epic has to now continue to support this, or they have to put in the effort to do this. And my point here is basically Stop Killing Games, while the thing is good, they're being incredibly vague when it comes to how they want stuff done. So my biggest worry is when EU passes this, if they do, and they've been very what's the word I'm looking for? Antitrust these days, right? If they do pass this, right, it sets a precedence that will echo into a lot of things, including what we do, and even though this might be in web dev, this might set a precedence for everything. So that's my thing, right?
Okay.
So I don't think anyone here disagrees with the notion. It's just the specific implementation that I'm worried about.
No, I agree with the implications as well, because there was a follow-up statement released regarding the same thing, explaining clearly that no, they do not want the developers to keep supporting the game beyond their life cycle and beyond making whatever losses they want to. The idea was they were going to shut the game down because the people had bought and paid for it. At the very least, release the binaries so that the community supports it. Because after that, they don't want any obligation following the developers. They don't want them to release maintenance updates. They want to release some cycles, content, nothing. At the end of it, if they are going to stop, hosting the game by themselves, all right, we get it. But please release at least the binaries if you're not going to release the source code so that we can maintain it going forward. That's where it is, because there's actually a good example where this would have been useful. Because, there was a recent racing game. I can't remember it right off the top of my head, okay? Thank you guys, the Crew. All right, it's a racing game. It had both single player and offline elements, all right, to it. Sorry, single player and multiplayer elements to it. Now, because they shut down the multiplayer servers, the single player mode also you couldn't make it work. Why? Because they tied the whole thing up, even though there's a single player campaign. All right, so Stop Killing Games is trying to address that now. I agree, a lot of content is pretty vague and it needs to be worked on before it goes anywhere. But please remember, it is still in its grassroots phase, which means that you have the power to actually go talk to these guys, make sure the wording is tight, so that it works for both gamers and developers without turning into another, a word not fit for polite company, before it turns into a mess like anything the government usually does. I do agree with the intent, Balu, and I do agree with the implications, but there is work going on to make sure it's better. And if you're interested in it, right, you do have to apply. You know what? Speak to the guys, get the wording right and everything.
Excuse me. Now, two things. Emulators are fascinating tech, and it is awesome how digital archaeology has come about. And I personally believe that it has a very important place in it. But FOSS United does not endorse piracy in the general sense. And also, we are over time. There's lunch outside. If you want to go, you can go there. If you still have questions, we can stick around and keep at it. And it's all optional, yeah.
Definitely. Adding to his disclaimer, I am definitely not encouraging anybody to go onto an emulator site and download an emulator and play a game today. I am definitely not encouraging anybody, okay?